Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is AJ Wilms, and welcome to Punching Left. We have a very special episode for you guys here today because we had actually got an interview with a January 6th defendant, Derrick Evans, just 2 days prior to when he went to jail. So, very big deal. This was the last interview that he had actually done with anyone, so we get to hear the very last thoughts that he had prior to going away. And unfortunately, as of the time of recording this, and likely when everyone is watching this, he is in prison. He's going to be there for many months, as you will hear in the interview. After the interview is over, I will stick around and give a little more commentary and explain my thoughts on the whole matter. But we wanted to jump straight into this interview, so without further ado, this is the interview that we had done with January 6th defendant Derrick Evans.
Thank you, everybody, for staying with us. We have an extremely special guest with us right now, Derrick Evans. And Derrick, why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us why you've made headlines across America?
Yeah, so my name is Derrick Evans. I was an elected legislator to the state of West Virginia. I'm the only elected Republican or elected official who walked into the Capitol on January 6th. So I was peaceful, nonviolent, non-destructive. But unfortunately, I quickly became one of the faces of the January 6th early on. And it's been a wild roller coaster for the last 18 to 20 months.
Wow. And the only elected official to enter, obviously, and it's upsetting to think that, our representatives are supposed to represent the will of the people, and how many thousands of people were there at that time, and yet only one single elected representative was there with the people. And of course, like you said, nonviolent. Let's do a quick, test here. Okay. Were you planning on overthrowing the United States government that day?
Absolutely not.
Did you try to burn the building down and light fires?
Nope.
Did you assault police officers or steal anything?
Nope. I actually got a fist bump from a police officer.
So
did they try to call that assault after the fact?
I'm surprised they didn't.
So the charge would be what then? It sounds like it was genuinely and legitimately completely peaceful. At the most, maybe a trespassing charge on like public property. What were they trying to charge you with?
So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I was on the east side of the building. All the violence, all the things we saw was on the west side of the building. And on that particular day, to get from where I was at to where those things took place was over a 1-mile walk to get there. I mapped it out, online. And so we had no clue any of those things were taking place. I was on the east side of the building. We walked through open doors, got a fist bump from a police officer. I'm on video. I got the video of the getting a fist bump from a police officer. And I'm also heard on video telling people to be peaceful, to not destroy things, which nobody was. It was just my side of the building. We were reminding each other of that all day long because we knew what the media would potentially do. I was originally charged with 2 misdemeanors. A few weeks later, a month or so later, they came and charged me 2 more misdemeanors. And then a month or so after that, they offered me a verbal plea deal of accepting one of the misdemeanors, and they dropped the other charges. And I said, send me the paperwork. And then they came back and said, we're pulling that verbal plea deal. This is coming from the highest levels of the DOJ. And not only are we pulling this plea deal, we're going to indict you on a felony charge. They indicted me on obstruction of official proceeding. This is the huge crime, I guess you could say, the charge that they are sticking on January 6th defendants right now because it comes with a maximum 20-year sentence. So at this point, I'm now facing 24 years in prison, $500,000 in fines. And, I'm sitting here thinking about my kids, and they're going to be almost 30 by the time I get out after 24 years. And they're using that to hold it over the heads of the January 6th defendants and then force you to plead to something, lesser because everything sounds good when you're looking at 24 years. So
wow.
That's what they did.
The equivalent of like a murder charge is what they're trying to put you in prison with. There are many murderers, and we have a story later on of an attempted murderer who's out on bail right now. And there are many people who have committed murder and been convicted and received less time than that. It's absolutely absurd. And it sounds like, from my perspective here, hearing what you said, it sounds like they were just looking through the laws constantly, every day, 24 hours a day, trying to find a felony that they could stick on you guys. Because in the reality of things is you weren't violent. There was nothing that warranted a legitimate felony. So they just needed to slap you with some misdemeanors to hold you until they could find some felonies to slap on you as well.
That's exactly what happened. Look, we saw as they burnt down half the country. Black Lives Matter, Antifa burnt down half the country. The summer leading up to that, nothing happened to these people. They created their own country, for goodness sakes, out there. If that's not the reason, I don't know what is. And then they pounded on the doors during the Kavanaugh hearings in that same building. Those people got like $100 ticket. So in my head, I thought at worst I might would get a ticket or trespassing charge or something going in there, and I was willing to accept that. I understood that. But the punishment does not fit the crime. The obstruction of official proceeding charge, they're absolutely just grabbing stuff and throwing it against the wall. That crime was actually, or that code was created during the early 2000s during the insider trading, Enron, all of that. That code actually falls under tampering with a witness. So the obstruction of official proceeding under that specific code is about tampering with a witness who's coming to speak before Congress, and you tampered with them, and that would be obstructing that. And that is what they're using right now to throw against January 6th defendants.
That's unbelievable. Well, and like you said, I mean, we just had this with Colbert's crew, same thing in the building without permission. And of course, the charges were dismissed yesterday. Or you had, what's his name? The little gun grabber guy. He was in there also yesterday, disrupted a hearing. David Hogg. And again, no charges, they're dropped, whatever it is, unequal application of the law. And it's the same thing we see over and over again, that you guys are held like beyond what the law would normally entail. I mean, you have a lot of people where it's just straight up trespassing charges, things like that have been sat in jail for 14, 15 months now. Whereas you have BLM rioters that did real property damage, injured police and everything else, and they're out with no charges or bare minimum, maybe some probation.
Right.
I'm glad you mentioned my fellow January 6th defendants who are sitting in the D.C. jail right now. People don't understand exactly how bad this situation really is. I spoke to the wife of one of them recently. We received a message from her, and they haven't not been able to speak to their family members that for 14, 15, 16 months, the entire time they've been in there. No phone calls, no visits. They're in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day, locked down. I mean, this is criminal what has taken place right now. And then we find that there's a bipartisan resolution that just came out, and Senator Ted Cruz was one of them, which is crazy to me that they've been so silent on this January 6th situation. But they introduced a bipartisan resolution to release Brittany Griner from a Russian prison, and quite frankly, she has more rights than our January 6th political prisoners do right now. It's mind blowing.
Yeah. Because I mean, at least she was caught with marijuana in Russia, so she's facing 10 years. So them saying, the punishment doesn't fit the crime, sure, whatever, but you do the crime, you do the time. If you're in another country, you're playing by their rules. Sorry about your luck. And whereas we have all these defendants or everybody else they're pursuing and really persecuting over attending what was basically, an unguided tour through federal property, which again, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for the people that were breaking windows or doing other things they shouldn't have been doing. But somebody like yourself or other people that we've heard from that were literally just peacefully protesting, or some of the ones that were outside that are facing charges. That's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's obscene.
Well, and the crime has to fit the charge in any case too. And I mean, if they break a window, let's say, then the charge should be the same as if BLM broke a police station window or a court building's window, which in their case was, as mentioned earlier, a $100 fine or something. And I wanted to point out also that, these federal charges, as absurd as they may sound, the federal government has something for felonies like a conviction rate of 90+%. I think it's as high as 98% for some offenses. So when the federal government charges you with something, it's almost certain you will be convicted. Derrick, have you received any notice on whether you've been convicted of any of the charges that have been laid against you?
So when they came back after indicting me on the felony obstruction of official proceeding, facing 24 years in prison, the next plea offer was 24 to 28 months in prison, and I was not going to accept that. We tried to get the trial moved out of D.C. None of that would work. And so we were at this position basically from September of last year until January of this year. And then they came with the latest plea offer, which was still a felony charge of civil disorder. And but if I pled guilty to that, it was going to be 0 to 6 months, and it was going to be $2,000 in fines instead of $500,000. And it was basically a take it or leave it type of situation. We prayed about it. I talked to my wife about it, and she looked at me and she said, Derrick, hey, I know this is not what you want to do, but I'm asking you, I'm begging you to swallow your pride. Let's just plead guilty to this. Let's get this over with, and then we can circle back and come back to fight this in a legal and peaceful way moving forward. And so ultimately, we sitting down and looking at my kids and everything, it was really the only thing that made sense because, quite frankly, we were pretty much financially drained at that point anyway. So.
Wow, that's terrible. And I mean, you can see the photo behind you, obviously yourself and your wife and your kids, and the idea that the government is separating you from them for so long for these charges is absolutely absurd. And you also mentioned too, something I think is important, which is the venue of this trial. You mentioned it was in Washington, D.C. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, we didn't have to go to trial because I pled guilty, but they're all refusing to move the trial out of D.C. And look,
Right.
Jury is selected from it's supposed to be a jury of your peers. My peers are not in DC. My peers are not those liberal people in DC. 94% of them voted for Biden. So
Exactly.
I mean, good luck finding someone, and not only that, with all the media coverage, especially someone such as myself, considered a high profile person, been in the media a lot. There's no way I was going to get a fair trial in DC. And so that kind of really limited things as well when they refused to move the trial outside of DC.
Right, and then that's to add more pressure because, like you said, 94% voted for Biden, only 5% of DC voted for Trump, and now you have a Trump supporter who's on trial there. I mean, that to me does not yell, fair trial in any way at all. So I think that's just one other way that they're doing these sneaky little maneuvers to put more and more pressure on these J6 defendants to make them crack and plead guilty to anything. So then they can say, oh, look, they were guilty. They pled guilty themselves, without telling you about the venue, without telling you about the charges that were laid, the 20 plus years, the equivalent of murder charges, like I said, that were all being pushed onto these defendants.
Yeah, and again, it's the game the media continues to play, is they won't talk about an individual story like yours that where it is obvious that the government's overstepped their bounds. And instead, they paint the broad brush. They show the pictures of things that happened outside, of people overrunning barricades and things like that nobody wants to see. And, we do think the people that did that kind of behavior do need to pay the consequences, but they lump everybody into that group, and they don't mention anything about where the police opened the door, or there's a guy that the judge threw out the case because there's literally video of the police waving him in. And in the situation where you're at, like where you went in, was that one of them where the police held the doors open, or was it a different entrance?
So it was similar. Wasn't that exact one? I was on the east doors. They're about 12 foot tall. They're magnetic. It's the magnetic doors everybody's talking about.
Oh yeah.
Those are the doors I walked through, and there was a police officer on each side of the door because there was a big double doors, and walked through. But you couldn't stop at that point just because there was so many people filing through. But there was a police officer on each side of the door. There was a third police officer at about 1 o'clock in terms of how clock would go, and probably about 10 to 15 yards away. And I walked straight over to this police officer. I thanked him for his service, told him we had respect for him. No one was there to cause any issues. He gave me a fist bump. He never once said I had to leave or do anything wrong. So at that point, I was like, a fist bump seems pretty welcoming. I can walk on inside. So I walked on inside at that point. But you hit the nail on the head with the media. Man, I always knew the media was powerful. I'm from a small town in West Virginia. I never experienced anything like this before. You're supposed to be in America. You're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. The media makes you guilty until proven innocent, and they manipulate everything. They would take video footage of myself, and then they would splice it over and edit it over to the crowd on the west side causing all the violence, and then they'd cut back to me walking through the doors as if I was with that initial crowd. And again, that's tainting the jury pool from all the January 6th defendants right now. And it's just, there's no way anyone is going to get a fair trial because of that. And let's just face it, most of the media is controlled by the government anyways.
Yeah, exactly. They're really just controlled opposition at the very least, even when they do run a story that's slightly favorable to something that's against whatever the current narrative is. But also, as we've seen with a lot of these, they're lumping all you guys in together, and that is effective. But it's also it's not letting any of you speak. So you don't get any time on any mainstream media, any like Fox News or even like Newsmax or whatever. You're basically left to other channels like ours, or Lindell TV, or other networks that will actually platform you. And then also being pulled down like from Facebook. I know you had a pretty big following there. But the idea is they don't want you to speak. They don't want any of the mainstream population to actually hear your side of the story.
That's exactly right. They're trying to silence everyone on this issue, anyone who tries to speak out. And, I've taken that personal. It was a long 18 months. People are forgetting I was one of the first people arrested. I was in the first wave of arrests 2 days
Wow.
after everything. And it's just now finishing up. And so I've had to sit here and be bashed by the liberal media for 18 months, called all these horrendous things that are simply not true. And I was not able to speak out and defend myself on that. And I'm here to not only speak up for myself, but my fellow January 6th defendants, and to let the American people know that, yeah, it sucked. I've taken one on the chin, but I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to give up. And you shouldn't be scared to speak up and exercise your God-given rights.
Do you think you were targeted and they went after you so quickly because you'd held elected office before all this happened?
I have no doubt that a lot of this has to do with me being an elected official. When they first started arresting people, they laid out framework and they said, if you walked through doors and remained in public areas, you're getting charged with misdemeanors. If you did violent things, you're over in this category. If you went into the chambers and the offices, you're potentially facing felonies. I 100% fall into that misdemeanor category, which is why it's all I was originally charged with. And then as to my knowledge, I'm the only person who walked through open doors, was peaceful and respectful, nonviolent, and walked back out on my own who got hit with felony charges, to my knowledge.
Wow. Well, we commend you obviously for your bravery and coming on these shows and being a spokesperson for all the other people who can't because they're still in federal custody. Some, I believe, even without charges to this day. And, if the country was full of people like yourself, then we wouldn't be in nearly as many problems as we have today. And we do appreciate you being here, of course. And you mentioned like the media sucking. Couldn't agree more with you there. And something that we wanted to ask you is to get your honest side of the story. So we wanted to give you, as long as you wanted, to just tell us exactly what happened that day from your perspective, starting from, when you wake up that morning to when you left the building. What exactly happened?
So I got up that morning. We hopped on charter buses here in the area. There was a bunch of charter buses that were going to D.C. Hopped on one of those buses with a bunch of other, awesome patriots. And we rode the bus to D.C. all night long. We got there, 6:30 in the morning, maybe 7, somewhere around in there. We got out near the Washington Monument. We were going to go listen to President Trump's speech, and the line was already over a mile long. I mean, it was insane. And so one of the people I was with said, "Hey, there's some other speeches and other events going on down at the Capitol. I know some people have permits and stuff down there. Let's go down there." So we walked on down to the Capitol, and I was like, we'll just listen to President Trump's speech on the way home. Not a big deal. And so we went down to the Capitol, and we heard we were on the front side at that point. This is 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and we heard chanting and stuff taking place on the back side of the Capitol. So we walked around to the back side of the Capitol to see what was going on back there, and that is where a lot of the Congress people, a lot of the senators were coming in and out of the building, and it was just a good time, honestly, as somebody that was on our side would walk out of the building, everybody would chant USA and cheer for him. And if somebody who we knew was, a liberal who was, not on our side, we'd chant stop the steal. We would boo. It was nothing crazy. It was all fun. Everybody was having a good time. And then, everything started. We were there for pretty much the whole day, just hanging out, fellowshipping with people. There was a street preacher came by, and a church service broke out on the middle of the street. It was awesome. People were worshiping. It was incredible to be there. The biggest thing I want people to know that probably the media I know will never show is the diversity of people that were there. There were people of every ethnicity and people from all over the place who were there supporting President Trump and wanting to stop the steal, as we were saying. And then, at that point, the speech ended. Everybody knew President Trump, I guess, had made an announcement. Everybody's going to the Capitol. Everybody's excited. To my far right, we saw some people come through the bicycle racks. Nobody was fighting. There were tens of thousands of people on the backside of the Capitol alone. There was probably 20, maybe 25 police officers back there for an area that's probably, half a mile long, something like that. And so to the far right, there was some people moved the bicycle barriers and started walking through with their hands up like that. And when they were doing that, everyone else started walking through and started going to the Capitol steps. At that point, no one was trying to get inside. Everyone just wanted to get to the Capitol steps to exercise our freedom of speech. And I started to hesitate for a second and was unsure because I didn't really know if we were allowed. I didn't know, but nothing was happening to anybody. So I started having fun and ran with everybody else, towards the Capitol steps. We got to the Capitol steps and stopped. Nobody even attempted to get inside. The worst thing I saw, there were a couple of younger people who were standing on some government vehicles that were outside there. They weren't smashing, stepping anything or anything. They were just standing there. One of them offered me a hand up, and I said, "No, man, I think you guys need to get down. We're not supposed to be up there." And that was that. And we stood on the steps outside for, I don't know, an hour or 2 hours, a long time, just standing out there. You could see the doors. They were cubby hold back, like recessed back into the wall, these huge doors. And never even remotely considered going inside or thought I was going to go inside. I remember people were walking up. I was at the top of the steps. So a lot of people were walking up and walking down, and I'd get stories from them, talk to them as they're coming up and down. And there was a young couple. This was a big turning point for me. A young couple had said, the guy looked at the girl and said, "Hey, let's go up and touch the doors." And just to say we touched them, and then we'll go before we leave and go home. And I thought, you know what? I've been out here for a long time. Nothing's happened. I'm gonna go up there with them. I didn't think anything of it. We get about halfway to the doors, and that's when they started to open. And at that point, it was whoosh, just the crowd just, once again, not anger, nothing like that. It was excitement. Like everybody was like, "Oh, I can't believe, we're going into the Capitol, type of thing." And so
the doors open from the inside, like someone from the inside.
From the inside, open outwards. Yes.
Wow.
And that's important for people to know that. They're magnetic doors, and they open outwards. And nobody could pull those doors open. I mean, I don't think you could take a truck and pull those doors open.
Yeah, it takes something like 200,000 pounds of force to pull the magnetic locks on those doors.
That's insane. I mean, they're huge. I mean, I can't even explain how big. I mean, they were huge, and you could just tell that they were strong, reinforced doors. By looking at them, and all of a sudden, people in the front are chanting or hollering for the people in the back to scoot back because the doors open out. And they need us to get out of the way so they can open the doors. And they're saying they're letting us in. Now, who they were, I don't know. At the time, I didn't really think much of it, who they were. You're not thinking clearly. I'm just being honest with you. You're not sitting here thinking everything through rationally. If I was, I would have realized that, don't do this, but I was caught up in the moment like a lot of other people. I didn't see any violence or destruction taking place. And so as the doors opened, we walked on inside, and then I said the famous words that has had me all over the late night comedy shows and all of that. I said, Derrick Evans is in the Capitol, and and I was excited to be in there. And so that was the moment. About 10 minutes later, when I was inside, so I walked inside. There was people branching off to the left and to the right. I followed the group to the left for maybe 15, 20 yards. And I asked somebody, "What's going on down here?" Nobody had a clue. They were just wandering around aimlessly. In my head, I wanted to be close to the doors that I came in because I didn't want to get lost in there. So I went back to the rotunda area, the middle area, so I knew the door to go back out. And about 10 minutes later, or about 10 minutes of being inside total, I received an alert on my phone that said DC was going into lockdown. The National Guard was called in, curfew at 6 p.m. At that point, honestly, one of my biggest fears was being out after 6 p.m. and breaking the law. No joke. I'm not even at that moment. It never even crossed my mind that'd be the least of my worries. So I made my way back to the doors, went back to that same police officer. I said, "Is there another way out here? Because there's still people filing in, and you wasn't going to get back out those doors." He said, "No, your best bet's to go back out that same door you came in." And I said, "All right, thank you, sir." So I went back to the door. I kind of waited for a few minutes so there was an opening, and I darted right back out the door. And that was really it. Probably a few minutes later, I started kind of realizing, like, I don't know, man, maybe after I got that alert, I was like, I don't know. This seems kind of a little sketchy, not from what we were doing perspective, but I don't know. I was kind of getting a little nervous. And so I started to realize, and before I made it back to the bus, I was already getting hit up by the media. And still at this point, I wasn't thinking too much in terms of legal ramifications.
Sure.
Obviously, I'm an elected official, which doesn't matter. My district, they, it's red as you can get, big Trump district. But it's just like, I'm not trying to deal with all the aggravation of that. And then the people in the media hitting me up just got bigger and bigger. It went from local media to state media to national media. And I'm like, what is going on? Because I still didn't know that all this violence had taken place on the other side of the building. I didn't realize what other people know. Like, that's what people are having, I think, a hard time understanding is you're looking at everything in hindsight with all of the knowledge of everything that took place that day. myself and the people on my side of the building who walked through those doors, we didn't have that information. We didn't know those things were taking place. We knew that the session was over with, that they'd suspended the session for the day. We just thought it was because of all this outside protesting. That's another reason we didn't think it was a big deal to go inside, because we knew that they'd already, like, that was over with for the time being. And after getting back on the bus, probably about an hour outside of DC, we started getting cell phone service again, because they shut all the cell phone service down.
Yeah.
People on the bus start showing videos, some of the things that are taking place on the other side of the building, and we're like, and that's when I realized, like, man, I might be in some legal trouble here. But I still never in my wildest dreams thought that the FBI would knock on my door and that I'd be facing felony charges or anything like that. That still, honestly, it was probably close to the end of the bus trip or the next day before I really started realizing that was a possibility.
So fast forward to today. Where are you at now as of today? Where are you going to be tomorrow, the next day? Tell us a little bit about your immediate future now.
Yeah, so I'm at my house right now in West Virginia. It's my last night at home right now. I had to report by August 2nd. They let you report early to prison, thankfully. I was going to miss trick-or-treating by a couple days with my kids if I would have went on August 2nd. So I'm going in a week early so that I can be out in time to take my kids trick-or-treating. And so one of the things they're doing to J6ers is they're sending us to a higher level security prison than what's required, and they're sending us hours and hours away from home. So with even with the crimes that they charge us with or people pled guilty to, you're eligible for the minimum security prison camps is what we're eligible for. And they're sending all of us to the low security prison, which is the next level up. And prison sucks regardless, but I mean, every time you go up a step in level of security, it's going to be a lot worse. And there's a prison 20 minutes from my home with the same level of security, and they're making me drive 6 hours one way to go to Michigan to report. And they're doing that and just trying to make things harder on everybody. And at the end of the day, it's really just punishing the families on the outside more than it is those of us inside.
Do you think with all of this information and all of what we've heard that you would have in the future a case for your Eighth Amendment rights of cruel and unusual punishment being put onto you? Do you think you have a case to fight the government on that in the future?
I think there's a lot of cases that could and avenues that could come up from this in the future. I truly believe that people. I mean, I barely scratched the surface on everything that we went through on all of this, and what I've went through it pales in comparison to what my fellow J6 defendants are going through right now in the DC jail out there, if you want to call it a jail. It's solitary confinement and not being able to 23 hours a day, not allowed to speak to anybody or any of those things. So yeah, I believe that there's definitely some opportunities here. Anyone who is charged or pled guilty to the obstruction of official proceeding charge, I believe that those will be overturned by the Supreme Court sometime in the future. There's a couple of things there. Number one, there's the word knowingly within that code, and the Supreme Court has already ruled that that's unconstitutional on a different code using that term. And then number two, the punishment doesn't even fit the crime because none of us tampered with a witness, and that's what that is falling under. I don't know how that affects me on the legal side of things, considering they use that to basically force me to plead to something else.
Yeah.
But I don't know how that affects me since I don't have that exact charge as to what I pled to. But there's going to be a lot of stuff here in the future. My hope is that our Republican elected officials will step up and actually start speaking out for us and do their job.
Yeah, because there's been very few that are elected, unfortunately, that really have taken a hard stand. And further, with your case, it's clearly unequal application of the law because, again, as we saw during all the BLM riots, charges dropped or non-existent. And then not to mention, too, everybody's talking about Ray Epps right now, but there's at least 80 other individuals that private attorneys, defense attorneys for J6 defendants right now want information if these people were federal operatives or federal agents. But again, the government's not talking or cooperating. I think there's going to be a lot of blowback once the next election goes through, because again, this is very clearly political persecution, not prosecution.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of evidence coming out, such as Ray Epps for one, and I believe he was on the FBI most wanted list at one point, and then they took him off mysteriously. No one's again. There's known to be other agitators who are there who are getting a lot of this going, And then not only that, there's over 14,000 hours of video footage of that day that they're not only not releasing to the public, quite frankly, they're not releasing those to the January 6th defendants that we can use that to turn around and try to exonerate ourselves. We asked for the footage. We wanted to see the footage of that day. And first of all, they sent us so much footage. It was unreal. That it was almost impossible to have enough manpower to go through all of it, but none of it was what you were actually wanting to see. It was a lot of this was all the public videos that's already been released. That's what they're releasing to the January 6th defendants right now. You're not getting anything that the general public doesn't have access to, and you're supposed to have an opportunity to defend yourself and to have that evidence that could potentially prove your innocence.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, but instead they just try to overwhelm your defense team, make sure that you can't sift through this pile to find something that may or may not even be there. And the idea is just to burn your time. Yeah, burn your time, burn your wallet. And that's another thing I know you mentioned before was even finding an attorney. There are barriers to that. People don't want the case, and then the amount of money you have to come up with up front is not reasonable for somebody that's a regular family person like yourself.
Absolutely. And so, when they first arrest you, they collect all that information. They know how much money you have. And I don't know this, I can't prove this, but I believe that they sit there and they know to financially drain you, and then they force you to enter a plea because they know how much money you have. You have to get that information up front when you first get arrested. They know all that. And so they definitely drain you financially. It's a battle of attrition.
Yeah, without a doubt. And last thing is, I know you do have a fund that you set up to kind of help your family while you're going through this. You want to plug that real quick? And then for our audience, we're going to make sure we have a link to that in the video description. So if you'd like to help Mr. Evans out, and I would strongly encourage you to, there'll be a link in the description. Follow that, and you'll be helping a good man that's been literally being oppressed by the system.
Yeah, I would really appreciate it. And if you can't give any money, prayers would go a long ways, guys. And
yeah, absolutely.
I'll have on True Social how to send letters to me. My brother's going to post that for me. Sending letters would be huge while I'm in there. But if you are able to give, and God's put it on your heart to give to our family, we're drained at this point. It's Give, Send, Go, and I believe it's / Evans family. I believe what it is. But I'll give you guys the link for that specifically. Any of the money, we shut down my business, shutting it down for 3 months. We got so to the point we refinanced our personal home. This has been very, very draining, to say the least, from a financial, emotional standpoint. It's funny. I was telling a family member today, we had our last, in the South, a lot of people go to their grandparents' house, and we all were at my grandparents' house today, kind of hanging out, just one last day to say goodbye to everybody. And I told my family I'm excited to go do this. And then, I know people are probably thinking, what? And I'm excited to do this, to go get it over with. And that way I can kind of move on. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And I can get back to, trying to get my family back on their feet financially, and just getting back to my wife and kids.
Well, and one more thing too is, I don't think we mentioned this on the show. If we did, it's worth reiterating. Some people may be saying, well, drained of legal resources in America, you get a free attorney. You have a right to a free attorney. Were you able to get a free attorney if you tried to?
Yeah, that's the biggest misconception out there. We see it on TV all the time. If you can't afford an attorney, won't be appointed to you. What I didn't realize, and I'm sure 90% of the people in America don't realize, is you don't decide whether you can afford an attorney or not. The government decides whether or not you can afford an attorney. And so once again, they take all your financial records at the very beginning. And if you make more than 25% of the poverty rate, you're not eligible for a public defender. So my wife and I, with 4 kids, if we made over $40,000 a year combined, which we did, we were ineligible for a public defender. So
100% of the legal costs had to come out of your own pocket.
Yep, every single penny of it, and it's not cheap. Most of the attorneys that you speak with on a case such as this, especially being a high-profile person on a high-profile case, most attorneys, it's like, hey, $50,000 up front as a retainer, just to get going. And how many people will have that sent around? That's what I'm saying. We had to refinance our own personal home. This has been very financially draining, to say the least. And I got 4 kids. We're very blessed and fortunate to have our health and still, our family and all those things. But it's been a long road. Now we're gonna have to continue to shut my business down for 3 months while I'm gone. Employees are not going to be working. My wife's going to be spending a ton of money driving 6 hours one way every other weekend to come visit me. And we still got a long ways to go in that regard. So
it's such an injustice. It's awful. It's absolutely terrible. It's a perversion of justice, and you'll certainly be in our prayers. And again, for the audience, Derrick will be going to prison, and that will be for months long. He didn't get off the hook. He didn't get a slap on the wrist. He will be, unfortunately, going to prison. So all of the help that he can get, whether it's financial, whether it's prayers, maybe even writing letters, I don't know, sending memes to you in prison. Some people do. I'm sure he would deeply appreciate. So we will have the link down below for the Give, Send, Go for Derrick. Mike, do you have any closing thoughts here?
Not right at the moment. I just want to say again, for Derrick and for all the other J6 defendants out there, they really do need your prayers and any other support you can give them, even if that's writing your congressman, because something needs to change. This needs to happen. This makes us look like a banana republic. Like we should be a nation of laws, but clearly they only apply where the federal government wants them to, especially right now.
And Derrick, did you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to leave us with?
Yeah, the last thing I really want to say is, look, this could happen to anyone. I didn't set out that day to go be somebody who was going to be all over national media and taking on the government and fighting all these battles. That was the last thing I had on my mind. I was thinking of welcoming, my fourth child into the world and going and serving in the West Virginia legislature and trying to make a better state for my children to live in. And then I wake up the next day and, I'm in the middle of the swamp, and then I got, the weight of the government, the media, and everybody it could happen to anyone. I'm the most average person you would ever meet. I'm from a small town in West Virginia. I grew up in a town of 126 people. I now live in a town with 500 people. It's as small town as you can get. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. But I also want to let everyone know that I'm not going to quit. They've done this. They're trying to make an example of myself and other J6ers to scare you from standing up and fighting and speaking out for our God-given rights. And I'm taking that as a personal challenge to show you guys that we're not going to quit. We're not going to give up. We're going to continue speaking out and fighting to protect our God-given rights.
You've got that exactly right. That's really what it is. It's about punishing you guys in an over-the-top way to strike fear into anyone else that's thinking about making a stand. And that gives you even more reason to stand up and resist.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us, Derrick. We really do appreciate it. My name is AJ Williams, joined here with Mike Lauber as always. Thank you again, Derrick. We really do appreciate getting your story out there, and God bless you.
Thank you guys for everything you guys do. Thanks for having me, and God bless.
Extremely difficult to watch. I had my stomach turning for quite a lot of times during that interview, particularly when he was going over just how financially crippling this whole ordeal has been. And what shocked me is the fact that the banks work in association with the government, or at least Derrick was speculating, which I don't doubt at all. The banks working with the government so that they can coordinate to see when you really need money, when you really are at the ends of your means and you can't afford to go to court anymore. And then, of course, well, lo and behold, the government comes in with a plea deal, which brings me to the next point. We, of course, heard that the plea deal was a felony, which is like unheard of with these criminal cases, as far as I know, where you're facing a felony charge that should be a misdemeanor, and then the plea deal is a felony charge anyways. But this is how they do it. They want to intimidate you and scare you with decades in prison, upwards of 20 years in prison. As I mentioned earlier, that's as long as murderers should get. And many murderers get less than that. And perhaps murderers should get even more than 20 years. That's what they usually get. And half the time, they don't even serve that long of sentences. But when it comes to a January 6th defendant, because they trespassed on public property and it's framed as some type of insurrection, all of a sudden, that now is a felony worth going away longer than your average murderer would. It's absolutely disgusting. And it's upsetting as well, because I was going to say trivially, 20 years for breaking some windows. Derrick Evans did not even break any windows. Heaven forbid that any windows were broken of the Capitol that day. What a tragedy that would be. Imagine what the founding fathers would think of such an act. But Derrick Evans did not even do that. He simply walked through an open door that was open for him and others, walked around and left. And yet that is something that is worth putting someone away, as I mentioned, just as long as we would put away murderers, rapists, child abusers, animal abusers, the worst type of people in society. Makes you wonder why the regime, why the Biden administration, why the current American elite within our government is acting this way. And I mean, it's not just the Democrats as well. You can recall that it was also many Republicans, especially right after this happened, that were condemning these acts. And to this day, many Republicans have thrown all of these January 6 defendants under the bus. There's only been few, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and a few others that have actually stood up for the rights of these J6 defendants, saying they didn't do anything wrong. Who was hurt? Who died? Oh, wait a minute. The only people hurt and the only people who died were the right-wingers, were the conservatives, were the patriots that day, right? I recall that there was only one shooting that happened that day, and it was of a conservative woman. I believe her name was Ashley Babbitt, and she was shot and killed by the police. And wasn't it by Mike Pence's Secret Service bodyguard as well? And Mike Pence, too, totally betraying Trump, totally betraying the people of America and the Constitution. It's undoubtedly true, and we have to watch what we say here because we're on YouTube. But there's been a lot of interesting facts that have arisen over the 2020 presidential election. There has been people, for example, and this is a fact, who have been convicted of voter fraud. Now, look, YouTube, maybe just because some people were convicted of voter fraud, that doesn't mean that the election wasn't correctly decided and that Joe Biden isn't the most popular president in all of history, even more popular than Obama and Trump. But what it does mean is certainly we should be looking into this. And as I think everyone at YouTube or on Twitter or Facebook would agree with me, we need to do some fact checking. And there's nothing wrong with examining the facts. Let's examine the facts of this election and ensure that it was a safe and free one. And even if you believe that this was undoubtedly a free and fair election with no funny business whatsoever, and you disregard the actual convictions of voter fraud where people were charged, arrested, brought in front of a jury, on trial in front of a jury of their peers with a defense attorney and a judge and a prosecutor, and even then they said, yeah, this person, beyond a reasonable doubt, after being given legal defense, after we've put them through the entire court process and they've had due process, they're still guilty of voter fraud. Even after all that, and even if you disregard all that, you still need to honor the fact that many Americans do believe there was voter fraud. And if you disregard their opinion and you say, oh, it doesn't matter what they think, who cares what these hillbilly hicks from way out south or in the Midwest think? Who cares if they think there's voter fraud? There was none. Well, clearly you see the American people and patriots across America getting fed up with the fact that they're completely forgotten about. This is one of the reasons why we got Donald Trump in the first place. This is one of the reasons why even on the left, people like Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang are becoming so popular. Because these three people, as much as they don't have in common, Andrew Yang, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump, each one of them in their own way is attempting to stand up for the forgotten American, the middle-class American, who has totally been thrown under the bus by DC. Bernie Sanders says, look, you middle-class Americans can't afford healthcare, and it's all going into the pockets of Big Pharma, a group that conservatives and liberals alike do not like. Right? Big Pharma. Not a huge friend of anyone in the political arena, at least not the middle class people. So his message appeals to middle class people. Andrew Yang, same thing. Hey, the economy sucks right now. Corporations seem to be getting a lot of this money. Middle class Americans haven't seen much growth within their jobs or their wages. Let me just give you all $1,000 a month. And then, of course, Donald Trump, and this is, of course, the best method and the correct method to do, instead of just redistributing wealth or taxing people more and then giving them free things, as Bernie Sanders and Yang suggest, Donald Trump has a much better idea. Why don't we limit immigration? Because the immigration coming into our nation is cutting our wages way down. It's replacing American workers. And by the way, let's take a look at all this outsourcing where we're taking American jobs and we're throwing them into other nations so that they can do them. That's actually not good for our economy. And it's certainly not good for middle-class Americans. So all of these individuals, all of these candidates have been gaining popularity and gaining a lot of traction within the middle class because of the fact that they stand up for them, and these Americans feel forgotten. Now, how does this relate to voter fraud or January 6th? because it is that same group of forgotten Americans who are constantly told, you're wrong, your opinion doesn't matter, you don't matter to us, we're going to make the decisions and you guys just do what we say. It's that attitude that our Washington elites have that creates so much instability in our nation and creates so many of the issues that we have. Tucker Carlson, very, very bright man, by the way, much smarter than you would think watching him on TV, although he is smart on TV. I've read his books, and his most recent book, Ship of Fools, he brings up some extremely intelligent points in there, and I'd suggest you all read it, where he essentially says, look, throughout all of American history, we've always had our upper class and our elites and people who are pulling the strings, but they always had the idea in their head that we have to make sure the people are somewhat happy so they don't rise up against us. We have to make sure that they're, they have their bread in circuses, or they're at least taken care of, or that they can put food on their table, take care of their children, and, don't go after the nuclear family, don't go after their guns, don't go after their church, leave them be. And we can still be rich and wealthy and powerful, but let's just leave the people alone. He says recently, though, the elite in America have shifted their thinking into saying, we hate the middle class. We hate the average American. We want to replace the average American. We want to replace their jobs. We want to replace their church with nothing. We want to replace their families with transgender children and with abortion. So instead of having a daughter who would give birth to your grandchild, they want you to have a daughter who gets an abortion and ends your bloodline. Instead of having a son who grows up and marries a woman to have children, they want your son to become transgender or a drag queen or something to that extent, thus ending your bloodline again. It is an attack on family, and if you're watching this, of course, you understand that there is a war on family in America. You also understand that there is a war on church and our faith in America. And this is something that's relatively new for our elites to be doing. And this is what is causing the American people who actually care about their nation and their people and their church and their family to rise up and say, hey, I don't like this. We have to put an end to this. Now, again, when it comes to the question of voter fraud, the elite are taking the exact same attitude they've taken on all these other issues, where they say, look, we don't care if you think there's voter fraud or not. You're just going to listen to what we say, and we said there's none, so get over it. Well, when you take that attitude, it is not surprising to me that you're going to have things happen, such as what happened on January 6th, where people say, no, let's just drop Congress because we don't want them to count the votes because we don't think they're legitimate votes. We want to recount. We want to have this election be as legitimate as possible, and that requires some looking into the matter. So what happened is, as I've always said with many different situations, this must be my catchphrase if you've listened to the show, it's not surprising but disappointing that this has happened. But are we supposed to be shocked that there's instability in our country, that there's political factionalization? There's people who were yelling, hang Mike Pence, hang Mike Pence. We've heard this, and this is one of the arguments that the conservatives were being violent. Now, if you want to know if the conservatives that day were being violent, just look at whether they were violent or not, and you'll see that, hitting a window is not actually the same as what BLM did, for example, burning down every major city in America. That could be constituted as violence because you could look at the act and say that was a violent act. Now, words are not violence as much as the left may make you think. However, these words that the conservatives were saying, they were clearly upset at Mike Pence, and rightfully so. Mike Pence was supposed to be on our side. He was supposed to have a certain degree of loyalty to Donald Trump. And yet he threw, like the American people, Donald Trump, our leader, under the bus. For these Washington elitists, he did not stand up for a single second in defense of our people or of our election or of Donald Trump. Now, obviously, it's a little too late to have the 2020 election overturned. I think the general sentiment within the right wing in America is, yes, there was voter fraud. However, we can't really do much about it. We're like 2 years into Biden's presidency. I don't think, something's going to change. We may as well just focus on 2024. And unfortunately, I do think that they've essentially won this 2020 battle. And we should be looking to 2024. And more importantly, we should learn from our mistakes in 2020. We should learn not to trust people who are in the swamp like Mike Pence. I remember before, people used to stand up for Mike Pence saying he's even more conservative than Donald Trump. He's our guy. Hey, if they impeach Trump, then we get Pence. That's awesome. Well, little did we know, Pence was a complete traitor to Donald Trump, to the Constitution, and to the American people. It's absolutely disgusting what he did, But what can we expect from someone who has been involved in politics for decades on end and has contributed to the Washington elite system that has completely given the American people the short end of the stick for their own benefit? Once more, I say, not surprising, but disappointing. I'm not surprised that someone like Mike Pence betrayed Trump and the American people. It's not surprising to me, but yet it's disappointing nevertheless. I'm not surprised, for example, when even someone like Ted Cruz, who, otherwise has done great things as a senator and has done many good things in regards to gun rights and free speech and taking on big tech, but yet he comes out and accidentally calls the January 6 defendants and others who participated on January 6 terrorists, and tries to double down by saying, I call everyone who attacks cops terrorists. Is that so? Is that really true? It's kind of a loaded term, especially given the situation. To call people who are being accused of insurrection terrorists may not be the best verbiage, and I feel as if that's not something you accidentally say, particularly if you're someone who is a Harvard-educated constitutional lawyer. We're not talking about the average Joe who, sometimes says dumb things. We're talking about a very calculated person, and yet, again, this is someone who has been in the swamp for years. For many, many years. So I say again, is this really surprising? It is certainly disappointing, but is it really shocking? There's no one in Washington today, other than maybe a handful of people who Donald Trump has worked with and endorsed, that can actually save this country. The main issue is that all of these individuals in Washington buy into liberalism. It's just different brands of it. There's red liberalism, which is republicanism, and then there's blue liberalism, which is the Democrats. Both of these systems do not work if their basis is on liberalism, though. And this is one of the major issues, yet we have people like Donald Trump, who I would say is not necessarily a liberal or believes in liberalism, although to some extent, of course, he does. But he's more of a reactionary, a populist, someone who says we need to put the American people first, and the American people and the lives of Americans should come above principles. If someone gets mad at him and says, well, Donald Trump, tariffs aren't very true to free trade, that's not very libertarian of you. This doesn't sound like you're a good liberal or a good Republican or a good conservative. It doesn't sound like you're standing up for the free market. I think Donald Trump's response would be, the American people matter more than an economic system. Capitalism is a means to an end, just the same as any economic system is. And we need to recognize that no matter what system we choose to have, we need to ensure that the lives of our people are being taken care of to the fullest extent, which is why I'm personally okay with putting the lives of Americans over the principles of our parties. So yes, tariffs may not be something that Adam Smith would advocate for, and it may be, some would argue, antithetical to the American dream to not have complete and total laissez-faire capitalism. But I say, I want to live in a country where my people are taken care of and they're safe, and we can have a strong community. And if that means certain restrictions on our principles or pulling back on the extreme positions that we may take on certain areas, such as economics, then I think that's totally justified. And once more, this is what Donald Trump has done for the American people. These are the types of people that we need in Congress and in, of course, the White House. But there are very few and far between. The American people have been completely forgotten about from these Washington elitists, which is why you see people like Derrick Evans being sentenced to felony charges in prison. And I can only hope that if Donald Trump wins his 2024 race, if he does run, which it seems like he will be, that he pardons every single person convicted on January 6th. It's very shameful to see what's happening as well, because something they're doing is they're coercing individuals into plea deals. Now, the vast majority of charges do end with plea deals in our legal system in general, but it's particularly bad in this case because the defendants often think that they are truly innocent, but yet they have to admit that they're guilty of something to avoid a harsher punishment. So, for example, the point of plea deals is, let's say you have some guy and he's dealing cocaine or something, right? Bad charge, big, hard drug trafficking charge. Often what will happen is the prosecution will say, okay, look, you were trying to sell cocaine, but we're gonna deduce the charge, or we're gonna bring it down to you were selling weed, okay? So in exchange for getting a lighter charge and a lighter sentence, you don't take up any of the court's time. We expedite this. It goes way faster. It saves everyone time, energy, and money, and it puts less of a burden on our legal system. So if you just go to jail tomorrow by admitting you're wrong, we're going to give you less of a sentence. Now, in this case, the person is still a drug dealer, right? They're still guilty of dealing drugs, and they know that, and everyone knows that, and that's what they're caught for. Whether it's selling cocaine or weed or whatever, they're still being convicted for drugs. But this is a very different case where the charge that should be laid is at most trespassing, and really there shouldn't be a charge laid at all. Maybe there should be medals given out, in fact, if anything. But if there has to be any charge laid on these individuals, the only just one that could be laid is trespassing for someone like Derrick. And even on the other side, where it was more crazy, perhaps some vandalism charges, minor misdemeanors. And with this, many of these people are going to say, well, I wasn't actually guilty of doing anything wrong like Derrick, but what does the state coerce him into doing? Even though you think you're not guilty, you have to admit and go to prison and say, I am guilty. And that to me is a very disgusting part of this, that they force you to admit you're guilty when you're not otherwise guilty. Once more, the point of plea deals is you got a guilty person. They know they're guilty. So let's just give them less of a guilty verdict, or less of a serious charge that they can plead guilty to. But in either case, they're guilty. In this case, they're innocent and being coerced into saying they're guilty. Total perversion of justice as always. But this entire show trial in which we have here, with all of the January 6th defendants is. So it's upsetting to see where this country is headed. But as I've said multiple times already, this is not surprising to me, although it's very disappointing. I come out here and I say these things repeatedly, how terrible the state of our country has become because of our elites, because of what's happening within our government, because of what's happening in Washington. And I hope that others begin to clue in and see just how serious the issues in our country are becoming. Because these things will continue to happen, and they're going to happen worse and worse. And people are not going to be going to jail for just a few months or even a few years for wrongthink or for challenging the government in any way. It will become decades-long or lifetime-long sentences, or even the death penalty for questioning the government in the future. It may sound crazy or far-fetched right now, but remember, the Black Panthers set off a bomb in the Capitol and did not receive as long as sentences or as harsh of treatment as the January 6th defendants received for what? Walking into a building and walking out. Back then, if you would have said, hey, in the future, there's going to be a group of you, if you went to the Black Panthers and you said, hey, there's going to be a bunch of these like white guys and they're going to walk into the Capitol and then walk out and they're going to fist bump a cop and say, hey, I respect you. And then that guy is going to go to jail for a felony, to prison for a felony charge, where if he did not plead guilty and he was not forced to say that he was guilty before the law, it would have been away for longer than a murder. Those people would have looked at you like you were insane. They would have said, what are you talking about? We just blew up the building. We're not even getting that big of charges. Insurrection? That's insane. And yet that's where we are today. So don't believe it's out of the ordinary or out of the realm of possibility, I should say, that in 20 years from now, or even 10 years from now, perhaps even sooner, we could be seeing thought crimes that, you can be put in prison for thinking the wrong thing, for being in the wrong place, for protesting the government. Even protesting the government in a very peaceful way, where there's no violence, there's no broken windows, and perhaps not even trespassing within a public building. Hard to believe, right? But there can be protests that even don't include that. And even in these cases in the future, we can expect to see some very, very bad results, in my opinion. And when that day comes, I will be sitting here again saying this is not surprising, but disappointing. The American people, we demand change. We need change, and we need these rhinos out of Congress. We need these Democrats out of Congress. And we need America First patriots and populists and reactionaries and nationalists in our government to purge all of those who are in the swamp, all of those who are in the intelligence agencies, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. All of these groups conspire against the American people and work with Washington elitists. And this is the major problem in the United States. Until that is addressed, our country will not be fixed. And they want to distract us and keep us busy. And we are rightfully kept busy with the fact that they're trying to turn your kid transgender. They're trying to give your daughter an abortion. They're trying to go into your child's school and teach disgusting things that I cannot even repeat on YouTube, nor would I want to repeat on the show. Completely degenerate and disgusting things that they're trying to teach your child. And this keeps us preoccupied and busy so that we can't stop them from what they're doing. We need to realize we need to have elected representatives to go into Washington and clean up the place. There is no other option at this point. So it's been a very long episode here, and very disappointing seeing what's happened to our friend Derrick Evans. But we do have, again, in the description below, a link to his GoFundMe. Please do feel free to donate to him and his family. Again, he has 4 kids, and they're going to be without a father for the next few months. He had to put his business on hold because he's obviously going to be put away for a long time. It's really throwing a wrench into the engine of his life, this whole January 6th thing. It's very disappointing. And, it's important to keep in mind, as Mike always says, the left will donate the last $3 in their bank account to bail out one of their Antifa or BLM friends from prison after they burn down a building. But on the right, we tend to be a little more stingy with our money. So it would be good to donate to this cause. We will put his, I don't know if I said his GoFundMe before, but I believe it's a Gift Send Go down in the link, as a link in the description below. So please do consider donating there. Also, please consider sharing this live stream or clipping the interview and sharing that around if you'd like. We'd love to get Derrick's story out there. And if you'd like to show this to any of your friends, if you work in media or anything, to get Derrick onto larger networks, I'm sure he would appreciate that too, to get a story out. Thank you guys for staying with us throughout this whole ordeal, or this whole episode, and listening to Derrick's whole ordeal. We deeply appreciate it. Thank you all very much for joining our episode today. Make sure you find us on punchingleft.com. My name is AJ Wilms. Thank you for joining me. God bless you guys, and take care.